Wow. Hey, homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. I am making a batch of fire cider. And there are lots of recipes for fire cider out there online. It's a classic herbal remedy for colds and flu season. It's a good immune booster, and it's really good to take either while you have a cold or if you think you're coming down with a cold. It's kind of a classic thing to take just as you start to feel that tickle in the back of your throat. And I make a batch every year. This is equal parts, roughly, of horseradish, onion, and garlic, and then half again as much of that in ginger. And then I like to add some turmeric to the mix. And that was the last thing you saw me put in there. The horseradish is quite volatile, and so that's what that was. I opened the top of that and just about napalmed myself with the fumes from the horseradish. Fresh ground horseradish is very, very sharp, and it's a lot like wasabi, so it'll light you right up. And I wasn't thinking that I probably should have let that sit for a minute before I opened up the lid. And so what I'm going to do is I've got all of this finely ground in my food processor. And you could just finely chop this. You don't have to grind it. I just do it because it's easy. And then I'm going to add apple cider vinegar. And this is an instance where I really like to use the raw apple cider vinegar that has the mother and hasn't been pasteurized, because you're going to get all of those additional probiotics in there from that. So we're going to do this. I'm going to add a little bit of cayenne, and then we're going to cover this with cider vinegar, and then I'm just going to let it sit. I typically let things like this sit either on my kitchen counter or in my windowsill where they're not out of sight, and I will shake it every day and mix it for about a month. And you can make this recipe as big or as small as you like. I find horseradish is something that I only dig typically in the fall. And so I only make this in the fall, although in an emergency, I could make this almost any time of year because that horseradish is out there all year round. But I find it's best in the fall, just as the plant's going dormant. All of the energy that was in the leaves has been pulled back into the root, and that is the best time to dig it for this kind of a project. Horseradish is a perennial, and you can buy horseradish from seed companies. You can buy a root start and start your own. I honestly just went to the grocery store and bought a stick of horseradish. If you've got a fairly well-stocked grocery store, you can often find it fresh. And I literally just bought a chunk of horseradish, took it home, and put it in the ground. And that's where my horseradish came from. And that works. It's pretty easy to grow, pretty hard to kill. Years and years and years ago, I belonged to a community garden in Boulder, Colorado. And somebody had planted horseradish at some point out there. And so it was kind of randomly coming up in a lot of different places out in that community garden. And I was told at the time that gophers did not like horseradish. And so I went around and just randomly dug up volunteer horseradish that was around and stuck one at all four corners of my garden plot, and feeling very proud of myself over doing that. I have since learned from my experience here that gophers actually will eat horseradish, and some of the damage that you saw on the sides of those roots as I was peeling them was from gophers. And one of the big piles of horseradish that I dug this year, that I made horseradish sauce out of, that I was selling locally, was from a horseradish that a gopher had dug up a piece of the original plant that I showed you at the beginning of this video and had moved it to a different part of the garden, and then it had come up there. And I knew it was there, and so when I put in my raised beds, I specifically built them around that spot so that I could let it grow this year and then dig it. I'm hoping to actually remove it from that area, but we'll see if I get lucky. The roots kind of go to China, so it's actually very hard to completely eradicate once it's in a spot. But yeah, you don't have to go way out of your way to buy horseradish from specialty companies. You can simply, or just go to the grocery store and find it there if you've got it. So we're going to add a little bit of cayenne pepper, and this is from my own garden. Okay, I have another bottle of cider vinegar. And you can see how cloudy that is. That's the mother that is part of this. And so I'm going to pour this in here. I've got another bottle. And you just want to put enough in here to cover. And this stuff is pretty heavy. It generally doesn't float, which is nice. And because this is already full of vinegar, it is not going to mold. So there's enough acidity in there that it's going to sit very nicely. So again, equal parts homegrown horseradish, garlic, and onion, and then store-bought ginger and store-bought turmeric, a little bit of homegrown cayenne pepper. And then you can add other things to this that you like the flavor of. And I'll put some suggestions in the description for what you might want to try out if you want to add different things that you think are good immune boosters or that you just like the flavor of. At the end, we're going to filter this once it's done and then add honey to taste. And the honey is really what makes this something that you can take out of hand in a shot glass. You really need that honey in there, but it's surprisingly tasty. It actually would be really good as a salad dressing. So it's delightful. It's not horrible. The first time I saw a recipe for this, I was like, I don't even know if I would be able to choke that down, especially with the horseradish in there. I'm not a big horseradish person, but the vinegar mellows it out, the thyme mellows it out, and it really is a delightful flavor by the time you're done with that garlic and onion in there. So yeah, fire cider. We're going to put the date and what this is on the lid. And we'll just give that, let that sit for a month, and I'll bring you back when I filter it, and you'll see what it looks like as a finished product. It is time to strain our fire cider. So we started this on December 11th, and it is currently January 13th, so just a little over a month. And I'm going to strain this twice. I find that with this kind of stuff, if you put a really fine strainer on it to start, that strainer clogs up really quickly and you end up having to fiddle with it a bunch. And so it's better to do a more coarse strainer first and then a fine strainer. So what I'm going to do is just dump the contents of this out into this strainer. And this is all of our onion, our garlic, our ginger, our horseradish, our turmeric, and then a little bit of cayenne pepper. It smells, not surprisingly, like incredibly strong. And then of course we had apple cider vinegar in here as well. Tricky to get all of this out of the shoulder of this big jar. All right, I'm gonna let that drain. And let me bring you around so I can show you this. The big thing here when you're doing this is you want to make sure that the strainer, the bottom of the strainer, is not sitting in the liquid. Because if it's sitting in that liquid, it is not going to drain well because it's sitting in liquid, not surprisingly. And so having a big enough container here so that your strainer will be held up above the liquid is important. And I'm just going to let this sit for at least an hour because I'm doing other things. It's not going to hurt it to be exposed to air like this. And we'll do this and then we'll strain it a second time through a much finer strainer and add some sweetener to it. But right now, we're going to drain nicely. So right now we have about 1.5 cups of liquid, and we'll see where we end up. All right, our ground fire cider has been dripping for about an hour. We're up to 2 cups from 1.5 cups, so we get another 1/2 cup out of that by letting it sit. And I'm going to go feed what's left here to the chickens. Hey, buddy. You guys ready for some goodies? Yeah? All right. You may not like it. Or you may. Once again, the turkeys seem to be more adventuresome on the more unusual stuff that I'm putting out. And you will hear things saying that you can't give onions to chickens or chickens won't eat onions. I've been raising chickens for 20 years and throwing whatever random vegetable scraps I had to them. And if they don't like it, they don't eat it. I'm not worried about any kind of weird ramifications from feeding them something that is on a list somewhere. So they're gonna pick through it, decide what they like and what they don't. And the nice thing about this kind of wood chipped chicken yard is it all just composts down regardless. So if they don't eat it, it goes into the soil. So it's all good either way. So we've got 2 cups of our fire cider and vinegar. I'm gonna run this through another strainer. And you could run this through cheesecloth. You could run this through a coffee filter. I'm not concerned about there being a little bit of cloudiness or pulp in there. I figure that's all just good stuff. And so I don't spend a lot of time trying to get this super, super clear. You can see there's a little bit that we filtered out that wasn't caught by that first screen, but not bad. And then now is the time that you sweeten this. I personally like to use about 1/8 of a cup or 2 tablespoons of honey per cup. That's pretty sweet. I like it a little bit sweet. You know, honey's kind of a classic when you're not feeling well sort of thing. And I do want it to be on the sweet side. I think it makes it much, much more palatable. This is local honey from my local beekeeper. We actually have hives on our farm that he takes care of. I'm not sure if this is from my own hives that are on my farm, but it's definitely local. I did warm it up a little bit in the microwave. I know a lot of people find that to be sacrilege because you're possibly killing off some of the beneficial raw honey, but raw honey crystallizes and it's really hard to work with. And so I am willing to sacrifice a little bit of that raw honey goodness in order to actually get it pourable. And I'm just going to use a whisk here to get that honey thoroughly stirred in. This liquid is room temperature. That honey was a little bit warm, so it should incorporate pretty quickly, but we don't want to find out that we've got a big gob of honey on the bottom of this when we're done. And I did not make a big batch of this year because I still had some left over from the previous year. I still have a couple of quarts of this, and so I really didn't need to do a ton of it this year. We haven't, thankfully, you know, partly because of COVID and not going out a lot and not interacting with people, we really haven't been super sick in the last couple of years, and so I made a huge batch last year and I've still got quite a bit of it left. So we're just doing a small batch so I could show you guys how this is done. Again, I'm just trying to make sure I get all of that honey thoroughly incorporated. I am going to have a taste. It's interesting this year. Ooh, it's very fresh, definitely potent. I feel like that could use just a little bit more. So I'm going to go back to the same container I had, and I'm going to add in maybe another tablespoon or 2 from where I started. And this will continue to age, you know, as it sits. So it's been a while since I've tried one of these that was quite so fresh. My kitchen is like bombed out right now with the smell of all of the ingredients that are in this. It smells very, very strong. And I just added cider vinegar to cover. I'm sure you could probably dilute this with additional cider vinegar if you wanted to stretch it out. If you didn't have a ton of horseradish or any of the other ingredients and you still wanted to get the goodness, you could probably dilute this by 50% with vinegar and you would be just fine. All right, I happen to have these bottles on hand from other projects. I usually just store this in a mason jar, but I think this is just gonna fit in this bottle, and so I'm gonna do that instead. It's a lot easier to store in the fridge. I do store this in the refrigerator. I'm sure it's shelf stable. There's so much vinegar in there that there's no reason why you couldn't just leave this sitting on your counter. But I like to put it in my fridge. It just lives in the back of my fridge until I need it. This is a 500 milliliter bottle, which is about the equivalent of a pint. So there you go. 2022 batch of fire cider that is actually now 2023's fire cider. So we should be good to go for the rest of the year. And hopefully we won't even need it. Hopefully we will just have lots of good health in the new year. And this will be completely unnecessary. But it sure is nice to have on hand for all kinds of warding off colds and flu when you start to feel that tickle in the back of your throat. So give it a try, make some, and keep your family healthy. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and please hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. We have new videos coming out every week.